Chapter 9, Modern Resonance, Where These Ideas Live Today and Current Criticisms. Socrates did not invent a single technique for all time and forevermore. He opened a living form of reason inquiry, a way of asking questions that exposes assumptions, tests premises, and leaves space for unknowns to breathe. The resonance of that approach travels far beyond the walls of ancient Athens, finding new soils in classrooms, courts, studios, boardrooms, clinics, and digital spaces. In this chapter, we trace how the Socratic method has taken root in contemporary life, what it contributes to our current conversations about thinking well, and where critics warn that it can misfire, mislead, or exclude. The aim is not to celebrate an abstract technique but to chart a practical lineage, from the Elenchus at the Agora to the seminars of high schools, the cross-examinations of law schools, the heuristics of cognitive behavioral therapy, and the algorithmic clarifications of AI-enabled dialogue. In short, we ask, where do Socrates' ideas live today, and how are they judged in a rapidly changing world? Where these ideas live today. Education as a laboratory of inquiry. If one seeks a contemporary home for Socratic ideas, the classroom is almost always the first site. The modern educator, inspired by Socrates' insistence on rigorous examination of beliefs, has developed a family of practices often described as Socratic questioning, Socratic seminars, or dialogic teaching. The aim is not merely to fill a student with facts but to cultivate a disciplined form of thinking, curiosity that questions itself, standards that resist easy answers, and a community of inquiry that treats disagreement as information rather than a threat. In many schools, a typical Socratic session unfolds as a circle rather than a lecture hall. The teacher serves as a facilitator rather than a guru, inviting students to articulate what they think, why they think it, and how they would defend it under scrutiny. The point is not to win a debate but to refine the terms of the problem, surface hidden assumptions, and test ideas against counterexamples. The method has grown more sophisticated with cognitive psychology and the science of learning. Teachers now design prompts that escalate in rigor, employ wait times to avoid reflexive defense, and encourage students to state explicit criteria for evaluating arguments. The result is a classroom culture where thinking is visible, argumentation is a heuristic shared by all, and humility, recognizing what we do not know, becomes a teachable virtue. In higher education, the same impulse travels under different branding. Philosophers, historians, scientists, and engineers converge in seminars built around core questions rather than discrete contents. The aim shifts from explaining what is known to examining how we know what we know, and why institutions assume the truth of certain positions over others. The Socratic mode, in this context, becomes a metacognitive tool. Students learn to phrase questions that dislodge assumptions, recognize gaps in evidence, and differentiate between belief, probability, and knowledge. It is, in effect, a school for thinking itself, a form of intellectual gardening that weeds out overconfidence while cultivating the habit of disciplined doubt. Law, governance, and public discourse. The jurist's hall and the town hall share a lineage with Socratic practice. In law schools, the Socratic method has become a defining emblem. Professors do not simply deliver statutes and case law, they interrogate the student's reasoning as a professional skill. A professor may press a student for the rationale behind every inference, probe for counterarguments, and illuminate the consequences of legal interpretations. The aim is not personal victory but methodological clarity, to reveal the structure of an argument, to test its resilience against contrary cases, and to ensure that conclusions rest on coherent, explicit premises. Outside the classroom, the public sphere benefits from a similar ethos. Journalists increasingly embrace interviewing styles that mimic Socratic probing, insistence on clarifying questions, insistence on distinguishing belief from evidence, a willingness to pause and reframe a line of inquiry when the underlying assumptions prove weak. In policy discussions, deliberative forums attempt to emulate this spirit by creating spaces where participants challenge each other's premises without resorting to ad hominem attack. The goal is not to triumph in rhetoric but to arrive at positions that are more robust, more transparent, and more open to revision. The therapeutic and the personal, Socratic questioning as a tool for self-understanding. In psychology and psychotherapy, Socratic questioning has found a productive home as a technique for cognitive restructuring. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, among other modalities, uses a long lineage of Socratic-style dialogue to help clients examine the evidence for their thoughts, test the accuracy of their beliefs, and reframe cognitive patterns that contribute to distress. Therapists ask structured questions: what is the evidence for this thought? Are there alternative explanations? What would I tell a friend who held this belief, to guide clients toward more adaptive interpretations and behaviors? The method here is a bridge between philosophy and clinical practice, translating ancient practice into a tool for mental health and daily functioning. In the broader sense of self-cultivation, many life coaching, leadership development, and personal growth programs borrow the cadence of Socratic inquiry. They emphasize reflective questions, the alignment, or misalignment, between values and actions, and the search for moral clarity in decisions that matter. The modern resonance lies in the shared understanding that questions, properly formed, can reorganize a life as powerfully as a set of answers can. Technology and the new public square. A striking current of the modern resonance is the way digital technology amplifies, disseminates, and also distorts the Socratic impulse. AI-assisted tutoring and chat interfaces in education, customer service, and creative practice often incorporate Socratic-style questions to guide users toward deeper understanding without simply handing them the answer. Some platforms deploy iterative questioning to diagnose a user's needs, reveal gaps in knowledge, and co-create solutions. In these contexts, the Socratic method becomes a kind of epistemic scaffolding, a gentle, iterative nudge toward better reasoning, delivered at scale. Yet technology also poses new challenges. The ease with which one can curate echo chambers, the speed of information, and the prevalence of polarized framing can render questioning more performative than productive. When the goal becomes winning the conversation online rather than clarifying the issue, Socrates' method risks devolving into a shorthand for rhetorical domination masquerading as inquiry. This tension, between inquiry as a communal, truth-seeking process and inquiry as a tool for influence or persuasion, defines much of the contemporary encounter with Socratic ideas in digital spaces. Ethics, citizenship, and the social imagination. As societies grapple with pluralism, moral disagreement, and competing epistemologies, Socratic questioning can function as a medical instrument for democracy, a way to test the premises of our shared commitments and to keep public debate from hardening into dogma. A healthy democratic culture often depends on citizens who can articulate their own beliefs clearly, listen to counterarguments with integrity, and revise their positions in light of better reasons. The Socratic habit of asking for reasons, of tracing the chain of inference, of recognizing the possibility of error, fits snugly into this ideal. It becomes a discipline for humility, public responsibility, and mutual accountability. Current criticisms. Despite its widespread adoption, the modern in-breath of Socratic inquiry is not unopposed. A chorus of criticisms, practical and theoretical, reminds us that a timeless method also travels through particular social formations that can distort its aim. Several strands of critique recur across education, law, ethics, and online life. Power, privilege, and the pedagogy of intimidation. One of the most persistent criticisms concerns power dynamics. In practice, a Socratic exchange can become a spectacle in which the teacher or mediator wields question-giving as epistemic authority, potentially humiliating those who lack confidence, training, or status. The risk is not mere discomfort but epistemic disablement. Students retreat from inquiry because they fear public error or because the questioning assumes a certain level of prior knowledge. This is especially acute in diverse classrooms where linguistic barriers, cultural norms about deference, or historical marginalization limit who feels entitled to participate. The guardrails, clear ground rules, a safety-oriented climate, and a focus on collaborative problem-solving rather than individual triumph are essential, but they do not always get implemented with sufficient care. Cultural and epistemic inclusivity. Closely related is the question of inclusivity. Socratic questioning presumes a framework in which rational discourse is the primary means of adjudicating truth. But many cultures emphasize different routes to understanding: oral tradition, communal consensus, moral storytelling, nonverbal cues, or relational forms of justification. When a classroom or workshop privileges a narrowly defined logic of argument, it risks excluding modes of knowing that are equally legitimate, even if not easily measurable by the standard Western canon of evidence. The modern challenge is to adapt the spirit of the method: careful questioning, open-ended exploration, mutual respect, without imposing a single model of rationality on everyone. Epistemic overconfidence and the illusion of clarity. Socrates' method is often celebrated for exposing ignorance. Yet there is a danger that its modern uses become a ritual of showy skepticism, a performance of rigorous questioning that masks certainty in its own way. A sequence of probing questions can produce a glossy, crisp answer that sounds correct but rests on shaky premises that have not been adequately tested. The critique here is not anti-questioning but anti-vanity. The method must be accountable for its own epistemic commitments, including the structural conditions that enable valid inferences and the humility to revise even well-defended positions when new evidence emerges. Method as technique versus method as attitude. Some critics argue that the modern adaptation of Socratic practice has ossified into a technique, just another classroom routine or interview tactic, without preserving the deeper ethical and epistemic commitments of the original. The risk is reducing the method to a set of moves: ask a question, press for a counterexample, seek a tighter premise. If stripped of its philosophical motivation, illuminating the living questions about what it means to think well, the practice can become hollow formality, a ritual of criticality without moral or intellectual content. Limitations in addressing complex moral dilemmas. The Socratic method thrives on clarity about definitions and logical structure, but many contemporary moral questions resist neat resolution. Bioethics, climate ethics, and justice debates often hinge on competing values, empirical uncertainties, and conflicting duties rather than straightforward premises that can be tested to exhaustion. In such domains, the strength of the Socratic habit, careful probing of assumptions, remains valuable, but it must be paired with other approaches that foreground value conflicts, comparative ethics, and deliberative consensus building. The method should not pretend to supply all the answers to intractable moral puzzles. It should illuminate the boundaries of reasonable disagreement and help participants navigate them more thoughtfully. Control of the narrative in public discourse. In the public arena, the Socratic impulse can be hijacked by those who weaponize questions to domesticate dissent, to corner opponents with procedural traps, or to manufacture the impression of reasoned debate while steering outcomes. A critical reader must ask, are these dialogues truly aimed at truth-seeking, or are they stylized performances designed to win audiences, suppress dissent, or secure power? When questions act as masks for persuasion, the method's ethical purpose, fostering truth, understanding, and wiser action, may be compromised. The remedy is not to abandon the method but to insist on transparent aims, verifiable reasoning, and inclusive participation. The pace of change and the friction of novelty. A final set of criticisms concerns the adaptability of the method to rapid socio-technical change. Socratic reasoning developed in a world with slower information flows and shorter distances between ideas. Today, ideas travel at internet speed, knowledge borders shift, and the margin for error shrinks as stakes rise in policy, technology, and public health. The ancient approach can feel glacial when confronted with urgent decisions. Critics thus urge a pragmatic balance: use the method to restore clarity and humility, but also pair it with expedited decision-making processes, multidisciplinary collaboration, and evidence-based action so as not to paralyze progress in the name of perpetual questioning. Revisions and responses. If the criticisms above sound stern, they also invite constructive adaptation. The Socratic method is not a fossil, it is a living practice that can be revised to meet contemporary ethical and epistemic standards. Toward inclusive dialogue. A responsive practice acknowledges difference as a resource, not a hurdle. Inclusive Socratic dialogue attends to who speaks, how they speak, and what counts as a credible warrant in diverse communities. Practitioners can explicitly declare their aims: to explore, to clarify, to revise positions, to co-construct better answers. Ground rules: no ad hominem, no derailing, equal opportunities to contribute, respect for silence help sustain a humane and productive inquiry. From dialogic to deliberative methods. Scholars increasingly connect Socratic inquiry with deliberative democracy. In deliberative forums, participants deliberate on public issues with a shared goal of improving policy through reasoned argument. The Socratic habit remains central but is harmonized with storytelling, experiential learning, empathy training, and values-based weighing of options. The goal is not only to sharpen reasoning but to enhance democratic legitimacy through transparent, participatory processes. Ethics of questioning. Ethical practice in the modern era calls for a responsible approach to questioning. Questions should illuminate, not humiliate. They should challenge ideas without attacking the person, seek precision without stifling creativity, and invite revision without coercion. Instructors, therapists, journalists, and facilitators who adopt this ethos model a form of intellectual citizenship that respects the dignity of every participant. Blending methods for robust learning. In practice, many educators and professionals now blend Socratic questioning with other approaches: direct instruction for foundational knowledge, experiential learning to situate concepts in real-world contexts, and problem-based learning that uses questions to guide collaborative problem-solving. The result is not a sterile kennel of techniques but a toolkit that can be tailored to the domain, the learners, and the stakes involved. The enduring allure: questions as engines of growth. What remains compelling about the Socratic method in the modern world is not merely its capacity to get students to think hard, but its insistence that thinking is a craft, one that can be cultivated, contested, and improved. The method reminds us that knowing is a process rather than a possession, that the best answers are often provisional, and that the quality of our questions shapes the quality of our lives. In an age of information abundance and moral complexity, such a reminder feels urgently relevant. Realizing the something like Socrates in today's practices. To illustrate how these ideas crystallize in concrete practice, consider 4 succinct portraits of modern resonances. 1. The classroom as moral workshop. A high school teacher leads a Socratic circle around a contemporary ethical issue: privacy in a world of ubiquitous data collection. Students pose questions about consent, autonomy, and responsibility. They test claims with hypothetical scenarios. They examine the obligations of corporations, governments, and individuals. The teacher steps back, guiding the process with prompts that push for definitions, counterexamples, and the practical implications of different stances. The classroom becomes a moral workshop in which reasoning is celebrated and mistakes are treated as opportunities to refine both beliefs and language. 2. The courtroom as a laboratory of reasoning. In a law school seminar, the professor challenges a student's brief with questions that reveal gaps in logic, overlooked authorities, and the potential for unintended consequences. The student revises the argument in light of the critique, and the class tracks the evolution of reasoning step by step. The experience models professional practice, law as a discipline of rigorous analysis where persuasion rests on the integrity of inference, not merely on rhetorical skill. 3. The therapist's chair as a site of reflective stance. In therapy, the clinician uses targeted, open-ended questions to help a client examine stubborn cognitive patterns. The dialogue is not about proving a thought wrong but about testing its truth conditions and its effects on behavior and mood. The client learns to articulate evidence, consider alternate interpretations, and adopt more adaptive beliefs. The therapeutic space, in this sense, becomes a microcosm of Socratic inquiry, an intimate arena where questions catalyze transformative change. 4. The digital agora as amplifying yet challenging space. A user engages with a Socratic AI tutor designed to help an anxious learner surface misbeliefs and test them against alternative explanations. The interaction is iterative, patient, and outcome-focused. Yet the user must navigate the digital ecosystem's temptations: fast answers, sensational framing, and echo chambers. The best designs foreground transparency, accountability, and the cultivation of intellectual virtues: courage to ask hard questions, honesty about one's limits, and a commitment to shared truth-seeking. The question of success: what would count as a good outcome? If we ask what would success look like for Socratic practice today, several indicators emerge. Increased intellectual humility: students and participants recognize the limits of their knowledge and remain open to revising beliefs in light of better reasons. Improved argumentation quality: reasoning becomes clearer, premises more explicit, and conclusions better aligned with evidence. More inclusive dialogue, participants with diverse backgrounds contribute meaningfully, and the discourse respects multiple pathways to understanding. Democratic vitality, public deliberations become more reflective, less consumed by partisan theatrics, and more capable of yielding principled compromises or well-grounded disagreements. Ethical use of questioning, questions illuminate and lift understanding rather than crush or manipulate. A curatorial note on practice. In applying the Socratic spirit to today's world, there is a delicate balance to strike. The goal is not to mimic ancient exhortations to tongue wrestling or to produce a modern-day cross-examination show. The objective is to cultivate a form of inquiry that respects the person, fosters learning, and advances understanding in contexts where stakes are real and consequences meaningful. Practitioners should remain mindful of intention. Is the purpose to seek truth, to help someone articulate and test their beliefs, or to win a debate? Context, does the setting support open dialogue? Are power dynamics acknowledged and mitigated? Evidence, are questions anchored in evidence and coherent with prior knowledge, or are they purely rhetorical? Humanity, does the process uphold the dignity of all participants, including those who may be slow to respond or less confident in their reasoning? Conclusion, the living art of questioning. Modern resonance does not require us to resurrect Socrates as a historical figure conducting a static interrogation for all time. It invites us to recognize that the core impulse, questions that clear away ambiguity, probe assumptions, and invite revision in light of reasoned critique, remains compelling because it speaks to a fundamental need in human life, to think well together. The Socratic method, in its various modern guises, offers a scaffold for that thinking. It can be a pedagogy, a courtroom technique, a therapeutic practice, a design principle for AI-human interaction, or a civic habit of mind. But it remains, at its heart, a fragile craft. Its strength lies in the character of the questioner as much as in the quality of the questions asked. It requires courage to admit ignorance, patience to resist the shortcut of certainty, and generosity to honor the process even when answers remain elusive. It demands a social ethics that recognizes that inquiry is a shared enterprise, not a solitary victory. If we keep faith with these conditions, the Socratic method continues to live today, in classrooms that become laboratories of thinking, in courts that prize rigorous reasoning as a public good, in clinics that treat questioning as a path to healing, in digital spaces that can elevate understanding even as they tempt distraction, and in civic life that expects its members to wrestle with difficult questions with civility and resolve. The portrait of Socrates thus remains a living thing, not a relic to be displayed, but a practice to be practiced, adapted, and refined as we, too, seek the good life through carefully shaped questions and conscientious reasoning. In the end, the method survives not by clinging to a form but by remaining faithful to its most essential purpose, to awaken, to examine, and to improve the reasoning that makes us human.